Vice Chancellor, thank you very much for those kind remarks. When I hear them stated by you, I wonder whether it sort of tells me that I can't hold a job. I mean, I have done a number of different things over my lifetime. Most recently run for U.S. Congress, which was a trial by fire. I ran as a Democrat in the state of South Carolina. I was an anti-Trump person in a very red state, and I lost. I lost the election, but I'm proud I did that. Now, I am very happy to see so many faces here tonight, because it is now tonight. And this is, I am not an IP lawyer. I'm a tax lawyer, as the Vice Chancellor has said. And so whenever I've had the experience in the past when I talk about tax to people that their eyes start to glaze over, and I'm beginning to see that already. But what I am extraordinarily intrigued by this title of the event today. It was very, very well thought through and thought out. I'm going to be talking about some developments in the tax world related to our digitalized economy and how those changes are very, very significant. And I'd like to just reuse the words that are there, but put them in a slightly different order. I'd like to talk about the past. I'd like to talk about our very tense present. And I'd like to then conclude about our perplexed future. So the words I'm using there doesn't have the word perfect in it because nothing in the world is actually perfect. But I am hopeful, as you will see when I conclude, that we are moving in a direction, even in the tax area, in the digitalized economy, towards shared prosperity. Now, going back into the past, when talking about cross-border income, the question is, who has the right to tax? Who is the country that has the authority to tax particular activities? And if you go back and you look where these thoughts developed, the League of Nations, after World War I, developed some concepts that we continue to use today. And in large measure, what those concepts are is that a company or a business has to have a presence, a particular permanent establishment in a jurisdiction before the activities in that jurisdiction can be taxed. And that presence, that permanent establishment, going back to World War I, just after World War I, are things like an office, a fixed place of business, a factory, hard assets, real people in real places. And you fast forward to today, where much of the economy is done on a digitalized basis. Those concepts that were put in place at the end of World War I don't work very, very well. And so what is happening is countries are unilaterally changing their rules. The problem with countries each doing their own thing in the international area means that the risk of double taxation of the same income becomes quite problematic. We're talking about a single pie and how to divide that pie. Just because different countries have claims on the same income does not mean that the pie gets bigger. It just means that it gets cut up so much that there's no pie left at all. So the United Nations has come up with a model. So these concepts in the League of Nations developed treaties between countries to determine how double taxation is to be approached and how disputes are to be resolved. The United Nations took those concepts and developed a model income tax treaty. And the particular provision that I'd like to talk about is Article 5 of that model tax treaty. There are now about 3,000 multilateral taxation agreements between various countries. The country of India has many, many tax treaties with various countries. Japan, the United States, Spain, the UK, et cetera, et cetera. So about 3,000 of these bilateral national double taxation treaties. And it says, this is the model convention of the United Nations. It says, for purposes of this treaty, the term permanent establishment means a fixed place of business through which the business of the enterprise is wholly or partly carried on. And then it goes on to explain a bit more with more words, not so much more clarity, that the term permanent establishment includes specially a place of management, a branch, an office, a factory or workshop, a mine or gas well, or oil or gas well, a quarry, a place of extraction of natural resources. And so there you can see hard, fixed things determine which country has the right to tax activities arising from those developments. Now, what I've just read is the model tax treaty of the United Nations. And of course, each of the treaties between countries can have variations and differences. And I just thought I would look out of interest. I live in Hong Kong and I also live in the United States. I came here yesterday from Hong Kong, and so I wanted to see the tax treaty between Hong Kong and India, because I knew that it would be a very recent one, because Hong Kong, being part of China, it's one country, two systems for another 50 years. And so into 2047, there are two separate tax systems that are involved, and Hong Kong has the authority to negotiate tax treaties with other jurisdictions, even though it is part of China. And so there is a tax treaty between India and Hong Kong, and it is one of the more modern treaties. It was concluded in 2018, in March, just a little over a year ago. And it has the exact same language that I've just read. And you would have thought that, given the fact that we're talking about a modern treaty in modern times where we talk about the Internet of Things and we know about the World Wide Web and we know about Google and Facebook and all of that, that this treaty might be a little different. But it's not. In fact, if you read the words, they're exactly the same with one exception. It adds one other element, one other description of what is a permanent establishment. So it goes on to talk about a factory, a workshop, an office, and so forth. But then it goes on to say, include a permanent establishment will include a farm, a plantation, another place where agricultural, forestry, plantation, or related activities are carried on. And so you can see that something needs desperately to be done to address the modern world we live in. And there you have this effort by the OECD that has been endorsed by the G20 and the G7 to come up with a convention, to come up with standards by which the digitalized economy can be taxed. In Japan, just very, very recently, the G20 met in June of 2019, and they endorsed this effort of coming up with new rules. And so, very much like some of the earlier speakers talked about the toolbox, I think you mentioned the toolbox. The toolbox in the tax area is inadequate. And so what has happened is that some countries have unilaterally themselves determined what sort of taxation they will impose on digitalized activities. France has, for example, imposed a digital services tax. India has suggested a similar thing. I know that India last week, there was a report released by Akhilesh Ranjan of the reform of direct taxation, and that's, as I understand, has been submitted to the Minister of Finance but has not yet been made public. I'm sure there's a lot of discussion about that, but a part of that report will have to address this particular issue. But the G20, of which India plays a very prominent role, has directed the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development to come up with a consensus by 2020 on these issues. And I'll read part of the statement of the Japanese meeting in June 2019. Because of your political will and your leadership, this was a statement to Japan, countries are working together and have agreed on a program of work to deliver by the end of 2020 a solution to these challenges. The aim is to overcome the obstacles that jurisdictions face in trying to tax the profits that multinational companies earn from users and consumers located in jurisdictions, particularly where those companies are not physically present in those markets. They have agreed to work out mechanisms so that companies would see their profits taxed at some minimum levels. In January of 2019, there were 129 members within this group of countries that are now trying to develop these standards. It's called the Inclusive Framework. So all of that seems rather hopeful. And in fact, this inclusive framework includes a steering group which is made up of countries, the steering group members of this particular group is made up of countries from Brazil, the Ivory Coast, the country of Georgia. I always have to pause when I say Georgia because I'm from South Carolina and the next state is Georgia. So I know that's not a country, but in any event, Georgia, Jamaica, Senegal, South Africa, and India. So the reason I'm mentioning that, India is on the steering group of this inclusive framework to develop these standards. So you'd think that everything would be going fine, that the G20 has endorsed a program that would devise a consensus on how to divide income in the digitalized economy. And during this last G7 meeting that was held in France just over the weekend, the President of the United States, Trump, got into an argument with the French President, Macron, about the French digital service tax. And there was a statement that a conclusion, a compromise had been reached at the G7, the President coming up with a compromise. And so what that arrangement, as has been reported, is that France and the United States have sort of on a handshake, have agreed that in the event that the OECD consensus that's going to be developed by 2020 would result in less tax than the current French digital services tax imposes, then France will refund that difference to companies like Google and other countries that would be charged the digital services tax. And you can see what is happening here is you've got countries like the United States that are saying that this technology is ours. We have the right to the income from this technology from wherever it's derived. The United States imposes tax on a global basis. Even when I lived in Hong Kong as a US citizen, I paid tax on my worldwide income to the United States, even though I was working and primarily lived in Hong Kong. But so you have the United States with the view that the technology was developed here, we have the right to tax it, but then other jurisdictions like India, France, the UK, Germany, Japan, Brazil, etc., are saying that given the fact that the money that's made from these technologies are giving benefit, are being derived in large part by users in our countries, we should have the right to tax that as well. And so, the future, I mean, I said that, we had a tense present and we have a very perplexing future. I think the future in this particular area could be no agreement could be reached, and then that would mean that there would be more unilateral actions by a number of countries, and that would result in double taxation of the same income, and that would slow down trade. to the detriment of the world economy. There could be an agreement. Let's hope that there will be an agreement worked through. Let's hope that there will be a revision of what's happened when the League of Nations met back after World War I, and that the rules would be updated to take into account the digitalized economy so that our toolbox is indeed updated. And I just want to conclude by being hopeful, because India is playing a prominent role in these discussions. I just saw, while I was sitting in the audience, a news feed that said something that that Modi had tamed Trump at the G7. I'm not quite sure what that's about, but let's hope that in the digital world we'll be able to come up with methods to allocate income to the jurisdictions that's not based on just a physical presence. Thank you very much.